it's really that discovery, those deep understanding of people, what they do, why they do it, those kind of bigger
Mm-hmm.
questions, right, that inform a feature, that inform a product by identifying an opportunity space or a problem. So I think it's, almost a critical piece to contribute to strategy so that we know that we're on the right track. Otherwise, we're taking a guess. Research at its core is trying to mitigate guesswork. We're trying to
Mm.
reduce that as much as we can across the product lifecycle so that we are identifying the right opportunities, the right path to go down. And then say on the evaluative side, okay, confirming or maybe not confirming if we've actually gone down that path. Did we meet expectations? Is this thing usable? Is it achieving what we think we set out to achieve?
Hi, welcome to People Who Design. I'm Cam Crass, and each week I talk with designers, creatives, and builders shaping our world through the craft and practice of design. This week, I'm joined by my friend and user researcher, Frank DePalma, a user researcher with over a decade of experience working on products such as Facebook, Instagram, and Messenger at Meta, and his current role of building out the user research team at PrizePicks. So let's get into it. All right, we're live. Let's do it. Hey, Frank, how's it going, man?
Hey, what's up, Cam?
Good to see you again.
Great to see you as always.
Yeah, man. I was really excited for this this interview with you because I think, research is such a vital part of design in general and product process that I really wanted to have you as one of my one of my first interviews to really harp on the value proposition of research in general and really just understand, as designers, how we can get better at research and how research can help product development process. So I was really excited to talk to you, man.
Yeah, no, likewise. I'm definitely honored to be here talking with you about it. I think it's going to be a really great conversation about this stuff. Obviously, I'm super passionate about research, which I'm sure we'll get into, but yeah, I'm just super excited to talk through all this stuff.
Yeah, you and I met at our previous company, PrizePicks, which you're
Yep.
still there.
Yep.
But yeah, from our first interview with each other, I was like, Frank gets it. He understands users. We need to get him on board. I love it. I was like, 100% gung ho. We need to build a research team because
Yep.
the prior experience at PrizePicks, there wasn't a foundational research. So, you really built that. And I just saw the value of it. And I just saw how much it can impact our decision making from a designer point of view,
For sure.
So.
Yeah. And likewise, I mean, that's, I think what I was so excited about too, was obviously the passion from you and a couple of the others to get research embedded into the process. So just the challenge of doing that and standing that up was a very exciting premise, a lot of challenges, which I'm sure we'll talk about today, but yeah, it was a thrill for sure.
Yeah, awesome. So let's kick into it, man. I would love to learn more. Maybe these are questions I've never really asked you before. So I would love to dig into your personal background story and how you originally got into research and where your focus has been in your career since maybe the start. So pick it up wherever you want.
Let's do it. So I've always had a passion for science basically my entire life. Growing up, I was like, I want to be a scientist. I went through all the motions of I want to be a scientist, I want to be a doctor, I want to do all this type of stuff. But at its core, I loved science and the scientific method, the curiosity, asking questions, and then answering those questions. So, I went into college kind of not 100% sure where I wanted to go, but knew I wanted to go down that road. And I was exposed to a lot of different things. I, was focused more on the natural sciences at first, and then really got introduced to psychology and neuroscience. And both were super fascinating and kind of scratched a lot of different itches for me, where I love kind of the natural state of things. I like to understand the natural world, which was the brain aspect. But then also people are super fascinating. So the behaviors. And then through neuroscience, there was this opportunity to study that relationship between the brain and behavior. And so I was fascinated by that, started working in a lab while I was an undergrad student. It was in electrophysiology labs. We were basically studying, again, that relationship between the brain. Yeah, it was really cool. We were putting EEG sets on people's heads and reading their brain waves that corresponded to certain behaviors or the reaction to different stimuli. It was incredible. An amazing experience, extremely challenging. But I basically was like, this is what I want to do. I'm going to be a researcher. So that was a big exposure to me of the ability to do research, to ask questions, have a hypothesis and then test it. So I went into graduate school from there. I was pretty convinced that I really wanted to take this academic route and continue that through. So then I went to Texas State graduate school and studied again the same thing, cognitive neuroscience. So I worked in what was called an affective neuroscience lab. So really studying a couple of different things: the brain, the corresponding behaviors to that, as well as some of those neural under correlates of attention, emotion, and then those kinds of physiological responses to things. And so at the time, I studied kind of the intersection of emotional responses, visual attention, and addictive behaviors. So how things in the world and in our environment impact our brain and ultimately our subconscious attention. So very, very specific and specialized. Again, super challenging. So we were doing things like eye tracking studies, again, EEG, where, brain waves that correspond to certain behaviors and reactions, and a lot of other behavioral testing. I got a chance at the time to teach, to mentor students, to manage a lab over there. And again, I was like pretty convinced I'm going to go on and become a professor. I'm going to go do research for the rest of my life. I'm going to stay in the academic realm. I also didn't know what else existed out there. Toward the end of graduate school, I actually got exposed to human factors, where I found out there's this kind of career path where I can leverage the things that I really love to do now, but do them in a more applied way. Academic research is wonderful in many ways, but also lots of cons to it. It's not super lucrative in any way. It's a lot of work. So through that, I found out about human factors and was like, I get the chance to do research, understand people, how they interact with technology, and work within a business to see how that affects what they build. I'm like, sign me up. That sounds pretty awesome. So I actually made that kind of choice. A lot of other life things happened too, but made that choice that was the path I wanted to take. Difficult, much harder than I thought it was to get into the field. So I actually worked in clinical research, completely different, but still research, for a couple of years before I landed my first human factors engineering role. So started off doing that, working mostly across like hardware, so physical products, a bit of ergonomics, so like how people actually handle things, how we conform technology basically to the human. And so super, super fascinating. I got to do a lot of great research across a breadth of products my first few years in the field. And then discovered more of the software side of things, which was the kind of the classic UX research, design research. And I was like, this is what I want to do, right? We're using technology all day. This was like kind of Facebook at its peak. And I'm like, wow, those, Facebook, Google, all these places, they have really big, robust UX research teams. Like, I want to do that. And so made the transition from human factors into kind of pure UX research. Ton of overlap, really similar methods, just kind of addressing some different questions. And then just went on and kind of continue my tech career across enterprise, mostly B2B early on in my career, a little bit of exposure to consumer, and then finally kind of got my shot at at a phone company, which I kind of had my sights set on for a long time. It felt like that's the pinnacle. So a few years ago, I started at Meta and I worked on some of their video and audio calling products across Instagram, Messenger, a little bit of WhatsApp, etc. This was kind of not quite in the thick of it, but sort of the emergence of the pandemic. So, video conferencing, all that type of stuff was at its height. So they're really building out this team, really exciting time. So I got the opportunity to work there and started there working mostly across privacy and safety. So how do we make sure people feel protected, safe, comfortable, given these experiences, given the fact that these things are tied to social media, where unfortunately, there are some nefarious actors. So it felt really kind of morally right in a way, where I got to contribute to the building of these really awesome, innovative products, but also protecting a lot of people, especially teenagers. So that was my first foray into doing research with young people, which is a whole other host of challenges.
What year did you join Meta?
So that was back in 2022.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so this was like tail end-ish, where it's like things are getting back together, but like Meta really was on that mission for that kind of building those connections, where a lot of people were still isolated. And so, I think at the time we had a couple of billion active users across the world using the products we were working on. So first time I worked on
Wow.
anything at that scale, which was intimidating.
Yeah.
But my time there was super interesting. I mean, all the tools and resources you can imagine. It was quite wonderful. No scrappiness needed. Everything was done, ready to go for you to do your best work and to think. Incredibly brilliant people, very competitive in some ways. So pros and cons for sure. But that culture, the thing that I missed the most was there was a very open culture in that anybody can challenge anybody's ideas.
Mm.
And they did that a lot with me, which accelerated my growth as a researcher. So that's the one takeaway that I have from there. Unfortunately, I was part of the layoffs in 2023. And then that's when, soon after, I started my role at PrizePicks with you, and then was challenged to build out, a research team, which I had never done before. So, which was a pretty
That's
wild
awesome.
experience, which, yeah, it takes me to where I'm at today, where I lead a team of 7 other researchers plus myself, and just continuing to scale and grow research at PrizePicks.
That's awesome. So your time at, going from human factors design to more of the digital UX world,
Yeah.
what were some of the kind of similarities within the research process on human factors and like physical products, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
To more of the software approach. What were some of the similarities or differences in that?
Yeah, so similarities, I mean, we're still doing a lot of, especially on the software side, evaluative testing. So the classic usability, are these things easy to use? Where's the friction across the experience and so forth? And so those kinds of methods and things translated very well. So it's kind of a natural stepping stone. I think the key difference, though, especially with physical versus digital products, with physical, you don't necessarily get that same luxury in many ways of software to say we can change this thing after we ship it.
Mm. Hmm.
With hardware, it goes to tooling, it's over. I mean, you can
Yeah,
revamp products over time, right? But it's not like you can say, ship it. We'll follow up. We'll do a fast follow, a V2 in a month. Once that thing goes to the factory to be built out and, millions of those, products are produced, it's over. So you don't have as much tolerance. So you really got to get a lot of stuff right. So I think with human factors, things tend to move a bit slower. We do a
mm.
lot of kind of evaluative or summative testing,
Quality control and making,
exactly. So
yeah.
really making sure it's done well. You have to be really, really confident that you are building the right thing and, of course, built it the right way, which I think still holds true for software. I think sometimes many of us get caught up on the fact that, like, because software is a bit more malleable, that it can change, that it's okay to put out a low quality product. I don't subscribe to that. I still think we can build something great and put it out there. You can still make it better and optimize it.
Absolutely.
But especially in the consumer world, for instance, there's no reason why we can't build something wonderful. So I think that's like kind of the similarities and differences there is there's just an inherently low to no tolerance in building physical products where you have a little bit more, play or wiggle room with software. But I think sometimes that gives us this false confidence that we can put something subpar out there and we'll just fix it later.
Yeah, yeah. That's an interesting topic. My buddy, I actually interviewed him for this podcast. His name's KT, Kevin Taylor. And
Uh,
he came from like more of a print background as well. And print and traditional advertising and creative design was all about making sure it's buttoned up before it goes out. And I only have done digital products. So I'm
yeah,
probably a lot more sloppy in that approach because it's like, okay, let's ship it and we can iterate
yeah,
and learn and kind of grow from there. But yeah, I think there's always a line between, making sure that that threshold for quality is there and you're not over perfecting it. You're shipping it, but you're,
yeah.
shipping it smart.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like it doesn't need to be 100% or whatever. And like that's kind of again what I think I get so much joy out of building software is because of that,
Mm,
where it's like it doesn't necessarily demand perfection, but you can refine things over time. So the work is essentially never done. With some of the hardware, of course,
yeah.
there are things that we can do to think about what that next iteration or version might be years down the road. But sort of once it ships, right? We can
Yeah.
adjust. I did enjoy working on both kind of the digital, where you're building the physical product, but also the interface that goes with it, where the interface can change over time. So you get a little bit of that as well. But I totally agree. It's like you got to have some bar for quality, but that's kind of what the joy of software and building it is. Like you can refine things over time. And that, as a researcher, means that's a ripe opportunity to learn exactly how people are using it
Yeah,
once that thing
yeah.
goes into production.
Yeah, for sure. One of the questions I wanted to ask you was like the role between, what like generative research versus like more of an evaluative research. I think there's sometimes a misconception with designers in particular that they think that they could just, run a usability test on an existing design and get some, success or failure kind of result off of that. And that's
Yeah,
true. But, one thing that I know you have previously advocated on was spending a lot of time on the generative research side. Can you speak a little bit about that, like the differences
yeah,
and how you kind of think about that, and in terms of what the design process is and how you ship products?
absolutely. Yeah, so I think, that's kind of how we generally, bucket researches into the more generative or sometimes called strategic or discovery research versus the more evaluative. Just as a simple definition, evaluative is kind of probably what most people, most designers are used to. That's kind of your classic usability testing, concept testing. And those kind of two buckets, evaluative versus generative, have two kind of different goals. Although ideally we combine them and you can get a little bit of both through those. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. With evaluative, we're trying to build something in a way that is usable, it's frictionless, or we're mitigating friction. That's kind of the goal of that, is to see how this thing is functioning against what we expected it to do in the first place. Generative typically precedes anything else we do in the development or design process. So think of things like discovering pain points, identifying friction in an experience. That could be something that exists, it could be out in the world or anything like that. Really defining user problems is what
Hmm.
generative research really is. And we do a whole bunch of different methods to figure those things out. But that helps us in the process to actually identify what's the most ripe opportunity for us to build. And that's what sets us up with those, classic in a PRD, a user problem or a user story. I think ideally that has a lot of its roots based in research, that kind of
Hmm.
generative discovery research. Now, sometimes evaluative research, we actually can pluck out some things that contribute to strategy. But in that generative phase, it's really that discovery, those deep understanding of people, what they do, why they do it, those kind of bigger
Hmm.
questions, right, that inform a feature, that inform a product by identifying an opportunity space or a problem. So I think it's, almost a critical piece to contribute to strategy so that we know that we're on the right track. Otherwise, we're taking a guess. Research at its core is trying to mitigate guesswork. We're trying to
Mm.
reduce that as much as we can across the product lifecycle so that we are identifying the right opportunities, the right path to go down. And then say on the evaluative side, okay, confirming or maybe not confirming if we've actually gone down that path. Did we meet expectations? Is this thing usable? Is it achieving what we think we set out to achieve?
Yeah, yeah. So what's the makeup, like what's the balance between how you typically think about allocating time between the two modalities?
Yeah. I think it highly depends on the organization that you're in. I think depends on the team that you're in, the maturity. So there's a lot of dependencies, I think. So I don't know if there's like a perfect ratio I can give because I think it is so highly dependent on the maturity of the
Sure.
organization, where they're at.
Makes sense.
But ideally, you're doing, I think, a mix of both. But it highly depends on our goals as an organization. What is it that we're trying to do? What's the phase that we are in currently, right? Like for example, when I started at PrizePicks, we had kind of a roadmap established in many ways, some things we wanted to do. So stepping in and right off the bat doing some really big picture stuff might not be what that team needs at that time. So I
Hmm.
think again, kind of conforming your research to where your org is and what their greater needs are. We could talk about even how that evolves, because I think there's a very
Yeah.
big difference between how that works at a place that never had research before versus, say, a place like Meta that, like when I came in, it's like very established. extremely mature organization, kind of research and design wise, versus say a place like PrizePicks that this is a really brand new function to them.
Yeah. I think that's a really good approach to try to speak to multiple because I've been personally in a lot of different organizations and it all is a different maturity level. Like
Yeah,
I've been like the only designer on a team before, and I'm like
yeah,
kind of like doing research myself, even though I'm not a researcher, but I'm still trying to get to the root of the user problem. So yeah, maybe
yeah,
speak on that. Like at when your experience at Meta coming in there with a very
yeah.
established research team, what was kind of the dynamic of how the team functioned between researchers and design and product and engineers? Like, how did you guys communicate and share insights and ideas?
Yeah. So, I think culture plays a big role into this too. And like not even like again, we throw the word culture around a lot when it comes to companies. I think by culture just means that dynamic, the kind of way that people generally work. My experience at Meta, and it is my experience, I think it's such a big company that it's almost like made up of a bunch of smaller companies and teams and so forth. And the deeper you get, the more micro things are. So people's experiences are different. So I can speak to mine. When I came in, with a when I say like maturity there, a lot of processes in place, a lot of ways of working, kind of an established respect for the different functions and what they do, right? This is design's role, this is UXR's role, this is what product does, engineering, et cetera. Those were concretely defined because they've been established. So everybody kind of knew that. And I think there was an inherent respect for that, at least in the team that I was a part of. I think the magic there was a couple of things. Autonomy, I think, was one. So, as a researcher, for instance, no one fed me a roadmap. No one told me what to do. In fact, I was almost, when I first came in there, was like asking myself, am I like, what do I do? And it's like, oh, you'll figure it out. And I'm like, hey,
That's good
and
and bad, right?
yeah, exactly. Intimidating and scary and all this stuff. But at the same time, it's like you have agency. It's like you need to work closely with your partners and figure that out. So at least the teams that I was part of, I was very, very fortunate. The people that were around me were just simply wonderful. Not only brilliant and fantastic at what they do, but just great people, empathetic people. And I'm not just talking designers, PMs, engineers, managers, data science, all of them. Really wonderful people. And we all had a shared, right? That was the main thing. We were some of the teams I was part of, there was only maybe 6 or 7 of us. Like you would think,
Mm,
Meta, whatever, 100,000 employees. There was really just us, me, and 4, 5, 6 other people. And we had a job and an objective and a goal, and we each played a role in that. And we understood
nice.
what each other's roles were and respected those. Now, it wasn't perfect. There was still the same things of timeline constraints and resource constraints to an extent. And this team is doing that. Like, so I don't want to say it was perfect because it certainly wasn't. It was far from it. But again, it was just the people and the dynamic that we kind of created for ourselves, I think is what worked so well. And that each person kind of had a pretty well defined swim lane in terms of what their expectations were. And like I said before, we respected that, right? Product, for instance, they're going to own the roadmap. They're going to really own the objectives that we set for this team, and they're going to make sure those things are done. And so I had a lot of empathy, say, for my PM there to say, you have a lot on your shoulders. I can help contribute to this. I can feed you some insights and challenge some of your assumptions or some of your priorities on the roadmap, but ultimately you own that. And then mutual respect was given back to me of, hey, you tell us what we should, prioritize from a research standpoint. Of course, I'm going to bring them into the fold and get their feedback and so forth. And always every step of the way aligning with them and never working, in a silo. But ultimately, I owned that research roadmap. This is the things we're going to explore. This is what you can expect at the end of the quarter, at the end of the half, whatever it is. Same thing with design, right? I saw the designers I work with given the agency and the runway to solve problems.
Mm,
That was a huge thing. And not just there, I've seen it elsewhere, other places, even in when I worked in hardware, industrial designers who are building out the physical product. They weren't just given a list of a ton of requirements from the mechanical engineer and said, just go build something pretty. They really thought about the problem. I mean, it was incredible to watch just the brilliance of the step by step problem solving. And it was the same thing at Meta, for instance, where here's our objective that we're sharing. Here's the problems we think we want to solve based on a whole host of things. And then working hand in hand with the designers to say, let's go down this path. Let's explore that. I would work very closely with them to test those ideas and assumptions. So I think that's what worked so well, that dynamic between the team, the different functions, and we also we had a good time with it. Like, I think that was a huge thing. Like, we had that shared goal. We would, get together and we got to know each other. That was huge. And I don't think that's something you can discount. It was like, we just truly acted like a group and a team. And that was
some of
where
the best
magic
teams. Yeah, man. That's awesome. Like one of the things you mentioned was the small team. Even within a large organization like that, the small dynamic of the team really makes a difference a lot of times. Like, as the team grows and there's more channels of communication, I think Jeff Bezos has that rule of like the 2 pizza rule. If you need more than 2 pizzas, the team is too big. It's like, do you see that being true from a researcher's point of view too? Like, yeah,
absolutely. I think again, like, you can have a massive org and there's layers and layers and things. I think the larger a team grows, again, it's easier for the mission to become unclear. It's, I think, just inherently harder for people to have a shared objective. And so then you might have competing objectives or contradicting ones or something. But the smaller that team dynamic, it's like, then it's easier for people to have a more equal voice. I think that's also important too, right? Like, a lot of people, I know, suffer from some intimidation. And I have certainly in the past in my career, like, if there's 20 people in the room, I mean, I don't really want to say anything foolish. I'm afraid to fail in front of 20 people. I'm less afraid to fail in front of 4 or 5. Right.
Yeah,
and so
sure. And especially if you know them and you work with them on a daily basis. And it's different.
It's the openness, right? It's like everybody's open, or like, if you have an idea or whatever, it's like, maybe I disagree or I can challenge you on it. And it's like, we're okay with that because we built that dynamic and it just makes us better. We're not taking it personally. Again, it's the whole, like, the too many cooks in a kitchen. It's like, then you just lose sight of the direction. Now, obviously, there's governance and things in a place like Meta and other places I've been where, like, there's design reviews and things still bubble up 100%. But giving those teams the agency, giving them an objective or them identifying an objective or problem to solve, and then having the autonomy to go solve that thing. I mean, I think that's where you get.
That's cool. Like, here's the problem.
Stuff.
Here's what the business objective is. Here's what we're trying to do. You figure out the steps and what you need to do to self-organize yourselves as a team to accomplish that goal.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's all the teams that I've been on that have had any semblance of success. And not to say that everything we worked on was successful. That's certainly not true. We failed a lot. That was like the one, I think, common thread through all of those things was just a tight-knit group, a solid unit that's working on a shared goal. And given the runway to do that. Now, granted, it's like, okay, we're not going to say you have 5 years to do it. There's all the normal constraints of a business. But I think that, like, too much over the top, sort of big top down thing just stifles creativity and ultimately good design.
Yeah. Maybe talk about, does an example come to mind on that? Like you don't have to be specific, but like in general, like, when maybe you're working on something and you have a pretty good understanding of the problem, more so than maybe a stakeholder who's just coming in with limited knowledge. How do you communicate that where you're pulling it back to the original problem, maybe that you're trying to solve to begin with? Is there a case?
It happens a lot. More frequently than I think I'd like sometimes, but it's also the nature of the business in many ways. And again, depends so much on who you work with, where you're at. But yeah, lots of examples come to mind. But I think, like, just in general, this is why it's so important to be in lockstep cross-functionally and understanding what it is that we're trying to achieve. But yeah, I've definitely had those situations before where there might be a contradiction between what it is that I know, say from research that I've collected, versus someone's gut, assumption, intuition, whatever you want to call it. I think, like everything, it starts with the conversation. I think earlier on in my career, I might be a little bit defensive. And these are lessons I've learned too. Like, well, the data, again, I'm a science data guy.
Yeah.
Data, I'm objective. Uh, I do first try to understand, at least from an empathy standpoint, like, why does this person have this point of view? Like, and I almost treat those stakeholders as a user, because at the end of the day, they are, as a researcher, they're a consumer of my research, right? I'm not really a builder. In some ways I am, I contribute to it, but it's like my users are basically the designers, the PMs, engineers, etc. I have to do what's best for them so that they can make good decisions. But yeah, there's certainly been those situations where there's a bit of a conflict between what we think is true based on research and data and what they think is true. And if there's a contradiction, I want to understand what that is. What's your point of view? I'll give you my point of view based on this research. Sometimes we can't settle it. And I think organizationally, it also depends, right? Does research and design, have they established quote unquote seat at the table? Is there a respect that's there? I'll be honest with you, sometimes in those situations, there's not an established sense of respect for what it is that I do or what designers do or engineers or anybody. I think those situations are hard to solve in the moment. That's where it takes that long-term relationship building approach,
Yeah.
where then I might have to turn back around and say, okay, this stuff didn't stick or land. I'm going to choose my battles. I need to preserve my own self too, and not take it personally in many ways, but understanding fundamentally, why is there friction? Why are we disagreeing on this? How do we mitigate this in the future? Maybe it's talking to this person. What pressure are you under? Why do you disagree with the research? Is it my approach? Getting into their head a little bit
Yeah.
to understand so that I can mitigate that in the future, right? Because I've had that situation, for example, the small sample size thing, right? Oh, you put this thing in front of 5 people, you gave us some feedback, and maybe you recommend to fix this, this, and this. So how can I trust? I think it's fine.
Right.
Okay, well, 4 out of 5 people, ran into this roadblock and were unable to complete this. Like, do you really need me to show you 40 more people? It's a problem. Let's again identify, is it a severe problem? How costly is it for us to address this? Ideally, if we're doing this early on, not costly at all. In fact, it will probably save us money in the long run. But then there is some of the defending, what it is that we found. But then at the end of the day, coming back to what my mission is I want to build with confidence, de-risk decisions. So my job then, especially in that resistance of, say, taking insights, is I will let them know what the risks are if they get this wrong, right?
Yeah.
And mutually talk about that too, to be like, okay, let's suppose you're right, whatever. What are the consequences if we're wrong?
That's a
Sometimes
good
that
way of
gets
framing it.
people,
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes I think that gets people to think a little bit more deeply about what it is that they're trying to do. And possibly, and I've seen some cases to be a little bit more open to getting insight to help their decision making at the end of the day, to say, okay, we've talked through, like, there are some risks to this. Okay, if we listen to this research, maybe we can de-risk that. Or even ideally, all of this starts much earlier on the process. So while I've certainly been in those situations, I now try to take the approach of, how do I prevent them from happening in the first place?
Yeah.
Let's align on the goal of the research up front. What is it that you need to know? What decisions do you need to make? And then tailor the research to be able to do that. And that goes the same for designers, right? We need to work hand in hand of, what is it that you're worried about, concerned about? What is it that you want to know? What are your assumptions? What decisions do you need to make? My job is to tailor the research so that you have the data and insight you need to make a decision. You're also much more likely to trust it if I involve you in the process.
Absolutely. Yeah, like I think the lockstep between design and research is critical.
It is.
From the very beginning of kicking off something. One thing you've talked about in the past is this idea of empathy, and having empathy for who we're designing for, because a lot of times, we're making these things without any kind of understanding of who we're designing for. We may think we know, but really it's the users and the customers who are actually going to perceive it differently than we would internally, because we have a lot of additional context and information about something. So how do you kind of think about empathy in terms of, like, removing your own kind of internal biases, maybe, or the designer's bias or product's bias, and trying to get back to the source of understanding that user and having empathy for their needs?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as a researcher, it's almost a bit easier for us to kind of divorce ourselves from that because, again, my designs are not the ones being tested. So it's interesting. A lot of times, at least the way I approach like a user interview or a session, if I'm going through concepts or a design, we almost always caveat it. I say, these are not my designs. Like it's basically a technique to get people to,
Open up.
be a bit more comfortable, open up, to be like, you're not critiquing me, it's not mine.
Yeah, this design is shit, man. Like, what are you guys doing?
And some people have said that before. But so it's like, I think it's a little bit easier for researchers to maybe remove bias, although we're all subject to it. I don't think you can remove it 100%. That's why I think assumption exercises are a really good thing of just go through, like, what do you think is true? What are your assumptions? And like, do we actually have something to back that up? I think that's a mindset that I think designers, PMs, and others can just try to employ. You're never going to remove all of your biases.
Mm-hmm.
You're never going to fully divorce your emotion from the things that you build. But I think if you try to have an objective mindset to say, what am I assuming? What do I actually know to be true? What do I not know to be true? I think that helps get you in the mindset to accept feedback, basically. I think that's the other thing is this is feedback when it comes to designers and their, the things that they're building. We're collecting feedback and then thinking about the goal is like, we want to build a really good product. And so is this helping me build a really good product? If yes, then let's leverage that. Going back to your kind of initial question, the empathy for our users, and I think it's a critical thing, is at the end of the day, it's like the most simple thing. Every time I talk about research and I try to evangelize it or educate people on it, I'm like, we are nothing without our users or our customers. There is no product, there is no company, there is no money, there is no job. Right? If they don't exist, then we don't exist. It's like the classic, again, it's maybe like hyperbolic in a way when I say it to people, but I mean, it is true. It's like, well, why else are we here? We're doing something for somebody else who isn't us. And without them, we are not us. So it behooves us to understand who they are, what it is that they want, what their expectations are, where are we missing the mark, where are we, doing well. We owe it to ourselves and our users, our customers, to be honest. I mean, there's just, I don't know why we wouldn't want to be honest so that we can build the best product for our users, and then tying that all the way back to like our goals as a business. I think something as a researcher I've learned over time is when it comes to empathy, it's also being empathetic for our business and for the stakeholders that consume our work as well or build with us. And I think you need to take both sides there, understanding our users holistically, but also what are our business goals? What are our PMs trying to do? What are the constraints that they're under, the engineers, the designers? And have to take that kind of holistic approach to things. I think research is always well positioned to help bridge that gap between user needs, expectations, but also our business impact. I think possibly oversimplifying, but if our users are happy, satisfied, their expectations are met, I'm reasonably confident that our metrics will reflect that, right? If users are happy and they keep coming back, well, then we'll have solid, retention. We'll have really good revenue. When we see those things dip, generally those are tied back, not always, but to an experiential problem, right? Maybe we're not solving this problem. Maybe someone's solving it better than us, but it all comes back to the customer. And so by understanding them and continuously understanding them, checking ourselves and being honest, I mean, ultimately that yields the best products. There is, when you look at like top companies, FANG companies, whatever, big consumer companies, I think the one thing that they generally have in common is that they invest heavily in understanding their customers, their users.
Absolutely.
I don't think there's a single successful big company out there that doesn't have solid design and research function as part of their core development process. And I think there's something to be said about that.
One thing you mentioned was around like the dynamic between the teams. Like, how do you kind of like the beginning with the end in mind, the goal?
Yep.
If you're kicking off a project, sometimes the goals aren't very clear. Like maybe leadership doesn't even know the direction. They don't even know what the goals are. So in that case, like how should teams or research and design kind of organize, to maybe seek that understanding before they kick off
Yeah.
something, or like how do you kind of think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something I've experienced quite a bit. Or if there's, differences in who thinks the priority or whatever is, I think, I think the truth of it is sometimes it's a challenge it's very difficult to overcome. And it's
Mm,
sometimes just an operational thing that, like, there's only so much we can do. But at the end of the day, I think that's where having that solid team and that small dynamic team structure is so critical. Where,
yeah.
okay, if those things are not going to be fed down or those things are not obvious or clear and we have to navigate this ambiguity, well, let's do it together. Of
Mm,
course, we can leverage research to help us directionally, but I think at the end of the day, that's where getting people in a room, collectively understanding what it is our space is, what problems have we solved before, and just going through those exercises where I think workshopping, structured, unstructured, formal, informal, whatever is really critical. I think just that alignment right there with that small team can set you on a course. Now, you might not be right, you might whatever. You can go back up to your leadership and kind of do the bottom up approach and say, hey, this is what we think we're going to work on. I think you got to just take some agency there. I think it highly depends on the situation you're in. Unfortunately, it is a really difficult place to be when you feel directionless, where there isn't a North Star that's been set. Of course, it's easy for me to say, like, go find a North Star. It's not always that, it's not
yeah.
always that simple. But I think, again, collectively, cross-functionally between your team, you can start identifying some of those things. I also think this is where, I think I alluded to this earlier, one thing I leverage as a researcher, my skills as a researcher, is not just talking to users, of the product, it's also talking to the people internally.
Mm,
So, in
yeah.
fact, especially in my position now where I'm really not executing research, I'm more in a leadership position. I kind of still am doing research. I'm just doing it with people internally. So, they might not give you very straightforward, direct answers in terms of, these are our goals and objectives and our North Star. But I think there are tactics and techniques you can employ just like we would with research, where you can start getting a sense of that. So I do a lot of that, of talking
Mm,
to leadership and treating them like interviews, right? That's what they are, stakeholder interviews, understanding what's important to them. Are there recurring themes that I'm seeing
yeah.
across the VP of engineering and product and design? And then start putting those pieces together. So
Yeah.
I actually think it's far less common in my experience for have very clear direction, and of course, navigating that ambiguity can be rough. But I think going up the chain and having those conversations and understanding where people are at, what they're thinking, what they're worried about, that can help give you some direction and prioritize the things that you might focus on too.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to ask around like the two dynamics of like an existing product that has users that people are using on a daily basis, potentially, or they're using it to do some sort of job where you can, you know, interview them to understand where those current pain points are in an
Yep.
experience today versus a brand new product that has no users yet. They have an understanding of a problem that they want to solve.
Yeah.
you know those are two different dynamics a lot of times for design on
Yep.
what am I actually designing here versus like what am I improving here on the existing one. And you and I
Yep.
worked on this awesome project at PrizePicks from just mapping out the current existing state of the journey
Yep.
on understanding what current users were doing today, and that story becomes clear. You're like,
Yeah.
shit, like they're doing this, we didn't even know that, and we could dive
Yeah.
deeper into that. So like, well, I guess the question is like, how do you approach design research for an existing product versus like a brand new product that doesn't have that like product market fit yet?
Yeah. I think, again, it all comes back down to defining the goals and understanding very clearly what our goals and objectives are. So, as a researcher, it's like I want all of my stuff to roll right back up to that. So, let's start with like an existing product. I think, again, depends on the stage and where we're at. It depends on the dynamics of the team, how big of a team, if it's just me. So, there are a lot of dependencies for sure. But by and large, I think it's really important, again, to take inventory of where you're at. And it goes back to what I said earlier, being honest with yourselves, right? Mapping out all those points of friction that still currently exist. What are the
Hmm.
things that are going well? I think that's also important too. I think a little bit of a misconception that research is always like, bearer of bad news. We want to tell you what's going well too, because that also feeds into prioritization framework. So if we find a part of the journey that for all intents and purposes functioning pretty well, maybe it could be optimized, but it's generally pretty well, maybe that's not a priority for us to optimize or fix. Let's go identify those things.
But
And
we don't want to disrupt that, because it's currently working today.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like, sometimes we go down the path of like, we change things for the sake of it. It can become disruptive, but it's like, just leave that stuff alone. But I think you have to have an objective, holistic view. And I think another thing that, like even with you and I worked on was, looking upstream and downstream from things. What are the general impacts? So looking holistically across the journey experience, I think is critical. You can then zoom in on certain parts to identify where we might want to optimize or refresh or add something or subtract, whatever. But that's what I think, my mindset is with that existing product, is looking for all of those opportunities. And first off, what problems still exist or what problems persist that we haven't solved for? We should probably consider prioritizing that. That goes into, a whole can of worms, but that's the high level. When it comes to new stuff, and assuming that we have a product idea, again, that could be at any different stage. I think what's really awesome that I found powerful for both design and research to take part in is if there is a competitor out there that exists or something tangential, going through a competitive analysis, I think, is really, really important. Not so that, you and I have both seen the teams that just take stuff, right?
Okay.
You just assume that they did it well and you take it and you pull it into yours. That's a whole different thing, but still just tearing it down and understanding that experience and all the elements of it. And then objectively, again, looking at what did they do well? What didn't they do well? Right? Research can be a wonderful tool to do that. And so exploring all of those things that can help shape your product. That's assuming that there is something that's related that exists out there. Beyond that, this is where that kind of generative or discovery research really comes into play. It's something I love to do is, again, let's understand what we know about the space. What are the problems that exist out there? What are we trying to do? And this is a wonderful time to identify what the metrics of success look. I think that's another fallacy sometimes a lot of us fall into, building a new product, a new feature. Like, how do we know this thing is going to be successful? If we don't define that up front, it's really hard for us to know where we're trying to go directionally with this. So that, I think, is like the most important challenge, is to be like, do we know how we're going to understand if this thing actually achieved what we set out for it to do?
Otherwise, you're like playing darts in the dark,
That's what you're doing. Yeah. And it's like, I guess that's fine if you have infinite cash flow and all this other things, but like, who really has that? And it's like, we have to be pragmatic. And so defining success metrics and really going through that process, I think it's critical. But again, depending on the stage, there's so much we can do. But I think it's taking that kind of, 10,000 foot view and just making sure, did we really understand the problem space here? Writing out those user stories, those user problems. Are we making assumptions here? If so, do we need to go do more research? Do we feel confident in our direction? Do we feel like there's any risk associated with any point of this? If yes, it's like, then maybe we need to do more research or whatever the case is.
Yeah. So, you've kind of transitioned from this individual contributor where you're hands-on doing research yourself to more of a leadership role. And those responsibilities definitely probably change. Like you said, you're like, the communicator of the research and trying to communicate internally on helping the teams make better decisions. What are some of those kind of like learning curves that you had to do transitioning from an IC to a manager role? And like, how's that transition been for you personally?
It's been a huge challenge, one that like has been honestly excellent for my career. And so, you're going from being responsible for all that end-to-end research and that output to empowering other people to do their best work. So a challenge for me, just quite honestly, is like taking a step back. And that's where trust comes in. So bringing in the right people and then understanding that you brought those people in for a reason. You need to trust what they do and that they do well. And then empower them to do that. So it's less about, for me and me being able to do those things, how do I unblock them from situations that might arise? How do I make sure they have the right tools in place and all that? it's been a huge challenge for sure. How do I set them up for a growth path,
Mm-hmm.
right? How do I make sure that they're working on things that are also interesting to them? I think the biggest challenge for me that has been exciting, though, is translating again from kind of leadership what the priorities are,
Mm.
and kind of narrowing focus from ambiguity down into something that, the people on my team can actually leverage to build out their own roadmaps and so forth. So there is sort of that reliance on me, where in the past I was able to rely on someone else to an extent to be like, what are people talking about the top? Like, what is truly the most important thing? Now some of that pressure is on me. That's those conversations that come in at, different levels of leadership. I've also taken on a huge role of, evangelizing and educating people across the org on research and doing that repetitively. It's not like a one and done. There's new people that join that don't understand research, haven't worked with it. There's people that have, and we still have to continue to do that. And so there's a lot of that where I'm like, talk tracks. I'm kind of saying the
Yeah.
same thing over, but also I'm iterating on that to be like, okay, I've tried this to make sure that they understand how and why we do X, but they're not quite understanding that. So I need to iterate that approach. I need to go back
Yeah.
to the drawing board and figure out another way. Maybe it's a newsletter, maybe it's a Slack channel, maybe it's a,
What are some of
you
those
know,
tools of communication that you think can like be helpful in that
yeah,
other researchers and designers could use to communicate that internally? What are you guys using? And
yeah. I think a couple of
a
things. I think
newsletter
there's
is a
still,
great idea, like an internal newsletter. That's pretty dope idea. Like,
yeah,
here's the word on the streets from the users.
exactly. And so it's funny, like I've seen so many, and again, a lot of these things, not even like my own original ideas, which I think is the other thing I'm learning too, is like when I came into this, I was like building up a team, all this stuff. I'm really just pulling from all my experiences. I'm emulating the things that I think people did well and avoiding the things that I think they didn't in the past. When it comes to the communication of stuff, though, I think being creative as much as possible, helping your research pop and kind of cut through the noise. You got to think about it. Everybody's got something to do. They're busy. It's a job. They have a
They're
task
on
that they want to
meetings
do.
all day.
Yeah. How do you cut through the noise? And
Yeah.
it's a challenge. I'll be honest with you. I don't have a perfect answer, but I have seen, like, at a past company I was at, this is back when being in office was more of a thing. This is kind of before remote, really took off. We used to print out journey maps, throw them on the walls. We had a TV where we would just have, like, executive summaries of things, or like we had a recurring video of, a user using one of our product, like just these little things that were like, it kind of play on repeat on monitors across the floor where the design team sat. So like when people came into the design studio, it was like, hey, I might not take anything. It just was enough to be like, it's marketing basically. Like, that's kind of interesting. And it's like, cool, you want to learn more? Like, come to my, share out or whatever. Or newsletters of, here are the top insights from this month. And that can be in
That's
any
dope.
type of form depending on your org. So I've done this. I've even done it just through decks, putting together, here are a couple of top insights. This is what we found. This is the implication. This is the impact that it had. Which again kind of shows, like, this isn't just me telling you, something we found. I'm also going to
It's not
show you.
you. It's
Yeah,
you're positioning it to like a third party where they could see it for
exactly.
themselves. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
exactly.
That's awesome.
So
So how are you leveraging, I wanted to talk to you about AI and the
yeah,
advances of research in general and like how researchers are leveraging it today. That's one thing that I think is just changing
yeah,
on a daily basis. It feels like it's like the latest
yeah,
design tools and it's outputting the code for us now. It's like, man, like it's hard to stay on top of everything.
it
So
is.
one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was like, what's your thoughts on leveraging the current AI tool sets? Are you today?
Yeah.
And what does that look like in the future, you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll admittedly not an authority on this, and I was quite late to the game because of natural resistance. Ironically, it's like I've been working in tech for a long time, but I am somewhat resistant of new tech, which I guess is just a human thing. So yeah, I'll be honest with you, like there was an initial fear for me to be like, is AI, whatever, is it going to take over my job? Am I going to have to like
Mm,
pivot my career to something else where, these things can do quite a bit of things? I am way less afraid of them now that I actually understand them a bit more and use them a bit more in my daily workflow. It has been honestly a great tool for me. So at least like in a leadership position, I have been leveraging AI as pressure checks for me. So when I'm coming
Mm,
up with a, proposal or, some kind of document, or I'm working on a deck to maybe, reach out to executive leadership or something, I found that to be a great kind of assistant, basically, to be like, I might put a prompt in there. Sometimes I reach that kind of creative edge where I lost my thought. I don't know what else to
sure.
give it a prompt. It's like, I find that it sparks my thinking. I'll be honest with you, it hasn't fed me much novelty, but there's so many things where it's like, I knew that. You surfaced it. It was deep in the recesses of my brain somewhere, and you helped bring it, consciously. That's where I think it's been powerful for me, at least in
Mm,
the position that I'm in. I know other researchers are leveraging it in other ways, especially with like qualitative analysis, where you have a transcript of an interview or something, and this can help kind of spit out some themes. I haven't personally used it much with that, but the researchers I've talked to that have, right now, pros and cons, right? Where it's like some of those themes emerged and they can be good, just, checkpoints for you, or can supplement, your own findings. And
mm-hmm.
it hasn't seemed to be a replacement. I know other people, we're not doing it today necessarily, my team. I know other people are feeding, these models a lot of context.
Mm, mm-hmm.
I'm very curious to see where that goes. So they continuously feed them business context, because initially my reaction was, well, I hold a lot of business context in my head, right?
Yeah.
Based on my conversations and all that. So I can tailor my recommendations, my findings in a way that I think will fit the reality of the business, what I think they'll actually do with it, the personalities. I'm not convinced yet that it's there. I don't know if it ever will be. I'd be very curious to see where it goes with that. But I think it's helping with a lot of those things. I know even our quantitative research function, it can help with just a little bit of code, in R for, you
Yeah.
want to build out a
Model.
specific stat or something, or a method you want to leverage. It might
Yeah.
expedite that. So I think there are a lot of use cases for sure that I see. I am more and more optimistic that I think it's, again, like, I still think you need the human in the loop. So I
Yeah,
think
for
it's like,
sure.
it's almost like the Google search thing, where it's like, it's basically becoming that new thing, where I'm sure there was a lot of resistance to be like, let's go to the library. I don't want to do this. I think, at least for me, it just supplements things. It helps me kind of get my ideas in order and just speeds things up. But,
Yeah,
but yeah,
it's an interesting dynamic. Andy Weir, I interviewed him for this
yeah,
podcast, and he had a quote. He said he's creating a lot of content right now for this series called UX Outpost
yeah,
YouTube series with designer Nolan Perkins, and they're on top of like the latest like AI tools, and they're creating content around it. And he had a quote that said, we're not going to be replaced by AI, but we're going to be replaced by designers who are using AI, And I thought
yeah,
that was an interesting take on it, because it's like we can use them to our advantage if
yes,
because you know research is human, and
yeah,
I think that's
it
the
is.
one factor here that is, we are users of these technology products, and we need another human to understand our emotions and our decipher like what our intentions. Until AI can do that for us, like
It
it is a little scary though. But one
is.
thing that came to mind was around like stakeholder communication and internal maybe direction. Like maybe product managers are looking for priorities to add on their roadmap, and leveraging an existing repository or surfacing basic questions like, maybe it's a quantitative questions like how many users do X in the app, or
Yep.
like do you see it kind of being used as that more of like a personal like repository of research that you could just basically call upon? Like, are you guys thinking about it in that way at all?
Yeah. So there's actually, like, when it comes to AI and that stuff, there are actually tools, I believe, out there that are starting to do this already.
Okay.
We've started exploring a few. I think one that comes to mind is Marvin. We don't have it. I think we might have talked to them in the past, and we're going to revisit some of those. I know there's others that I've been like kind of keeping an eye on. I can't remember off the top of my head, but that's a good point. It seems to be that's where a big opportunity is when we have this repository of insights and studies and research. And as that grows over time, one of the biggest challenges we always face as research orgs, especially as they mature and grow, is sometimes work becomes redundant. Mostly because people come, they go, and it's like, even if you have a really great library of stuff with good taxonomy and tags and all that, it's still hard to really pull from that. And you're expecting those, executive summaries or TLDRs to be really solid. I think that's a huge, huge use case that seems to be really gaining popularity, is like basically training those models on your existing research so that it can surface what we've already known, right? In the past, like, we would do literally what's called lit reviews before every study. It's like, what already exists out there? We did that in academia, but also in industry. Like, just what exists? What do we already know today? What are the gaps? That's probably a really powerful thing that would expedite a lot of work, but also reduce the amount that we need to do, right? Which is better for us as researchers. If I can do less research, but land the same or more impact, that's efficiency. Why wouldn't I want to do that?
You've talked about in the past where, research is only good if we're acting on it, right? You could do, you can put together a presentation or, some sort of analysis, and here's, the TLDR or an executive summary. But then at the end of the day, that meeting needs to land, because then it's like, okay, they need to make decisions off of that and off of that research. Because if it's just like ends up in a folder somewhere, no one then even addresses it again, So yeah, how do you kind of see that being kind of a crutch sometimes for communication?
I think it's an inherent challenge that a lot of us face, and I think a lot of researchers especially, take a little while, and some may never learn, but it takes a little while to learn the importance of relationship building. And that's what really gets your insights over the finish line, because you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, I could be the best researcher in the world and have a concrete process and just perfect in every way. If I'm unable to communicate that properly and basically have built up those relationships and that trust, it doesn't mean anything. And it will sit there in a library and you'll say, I've done all this wonderful work and no one's listening to me. It all starts before. It's all about the preparation and what you do up front. So understanding, again, having empathy for the people that are consumers of your research, whether it's designers, engineers, PMs, anybody. Setting the expectation up front at least doesn't guarantee you, but sets you up for more success later on when you say, this is exactly what decisions they're trying to make. This is the impact we're anticipating we're getting from the study. If all those things are in alignment up front, you have a much better chance at those things being leveraged later on. And so all that starts with bringing people into the process, communication up front. It all starts before you ever even put pen to paper in developing a research plan. So bringing people into the fold and doing that, I think, is critical. Earning that trust. So doing little bits over time, understanding what their needs are as, your cross-functional partners, tailoring your research to that, I think is important. Also, when you're talking about like qualitative research and interviewing users, I think there's nothing more powerful than bringing your cross-functional partners into that with you. Sometimes it's a challenge to convince them to come along, and there's some tactics to do that, but get them into a session. We don't have to wait for a report for you to do something. And we've been doing a lot of this actually lately on our team of join this as a designer. There's nothing better than watch people. You don't even have to engage. You don't even really have to take notes if you don't want to. Let the researcher do their thing. Watching people do this, we can make real-time updates. You can react to some of those things. You don't have to wait a week or two or whatever for a report. I think that's where a lot of it, then it becomes very hard to refute what it is you're seeing, where it's like, I am not telling you what I saw. You saw it for yourself.
Yeah. Firsthand knowledge, firsthand experience, and looking at that.
Yeah.
So on that note, like, what are some maybe a good definition of a designer that you would want to work with, and ones that maybe the opposite? Like, what makes a good design partner for research?
I'd say the number one thing is a curiosity, that curiosity mindset. You want to learn. That is, honestly, that's my only prerequisite when I work with a designer, is like, just be curious about something. You don't have to come with a refined research question. You don't have to understand at all what it is that we do, the methods that we employ. Just a curiosity and a question, basically. And we can even help formulate the question. I think that's what, honestly, probably if I had to boil it down to one thing, I think that's what it
That probably
is.
goes for product managers as well, right?
It goes with everybody. I think everybody who's building something, it's
Yeah.
curiosity, and then also, I think the problem solving mindset, right? To be like, I
Yeah.
want to, as a designer, I want to solve problems. Obviously, design and UIs and stuff tend to be the medium, that's the output. But there's a whole lot of stuff that happens before that. So on the other side of that spectrum, so some designers that are less desirable to
Let's
work
go.
with, the ones that don't approach it that way, that are not curious, they're not interested in learning, which to me means they're not interested in being better.
Mm.
And they're not interested in solving problems. They would rather sit back, wait for bullet point requirements to come their way, fulfill those requirements that somebody else set for them, put some flashy pixels together, deliver, and move on to the next one. That exists, that happens, and I see it, unfortunately, a little bit more frequently than I think I have in the past.
Mm.
I think that's just simply not what design is. I don't think that's a designer. Our tools like Figma, for instance, have allowed us to go super high fidelity much sooner. In
Too
some ways, I
fast
kind of
sometimes.
miss,
Yeah.
yeah, I sometimes
Yeah.
miss the days of just wireframing on paper. Like, it's just because it
Yeah.
forced
Yeah.
you to think about the problem.
I actually, I know we'll need to wrap up here in a bit. I have a few more questions, but I sat on a webinar yesterday with the authors of the Sprint book, Jake Knapp. Yeah. So they had a webinar and they talked about running this foundational sprint. It's a new book that they just launched. It's talking about like, instead of like, when you and I have done many design sprints together, but when we like start executing on the actual product, right? Before that, to get the leadership alignment, to understand why we're doing this, the goals. So they had a discussion on that, and they talked about the AI tools. Obviously you can spin up, you can just prompt, and you can have a product now without any designs at all. You can just prompt, and boom, Figma will make what's existing there, or Lovable, or any of these other products. But one thing that they still do today, which I am probably guilty of skipping those steps, is sketching and just drawing it out. Because like there's something about that when you're actually physically drawing it, it feels like we're skipping the steps by going into a high fidelity, because we already have a design system and we can already pull down components and we can construct these screens. But it gets away from that actual like physical movement on trying to like articulate something for someone, and I think you're totally right. It's like getting back to the paper sometimes matters.
I think it's honestly I'm like, maybe it's because it just slows you down, like, which means you have more time to think, right? Like, it's a lot slower to write something versus pull a component in and just slap something together, or to write a prompt, for instance. So it's like that slowing down, you kind of have to be pretty intentional. It's also like if you're using a pen, it's like you can't just delete that component. Like, now you got to start over again.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, oh man, I'll just do this in Figma. But yeah, you're exactly right. Because I think the words matter too, and what you're trying to communicate through the design. Even if it's like a sketch that's just with words, that still like allows 100%. You to like think through that problem a little bit more. Yeah, we're totally there. The one question I had is like around like, what would you give? What kind of advice would you give to a user researcher who wants to advance in their own career or get into what you do? What would you say to them?
So I know, at least now it's tough times. Like, admittedly, it is, tough times. I think some people have said UX research has gone through a reckoning and all this. Like, I'm not sure I'd necessarily agree. I think it's just a weird time in tech in general over the last couple of years. So I also just pragmatically, it's difficult, and it's possibly even more difficult than when I got in. I think, my advice would be, leverage all of the resources that exist out there. It's a wonderful time, and this goes for anybody. LinkedIn articles, even the Nielsen Norman stuff. There's so many free content, honestly, out there that can help familiarize yourself with, UX research, and of course, learning those methods. But I think, one of the things, I'm not sure if necessarily experience can replace this, but is really working to hone your soft skills. I don't think that that's emphasized nearly enough. It goes back to what we talked about before of communication. Again, you can be the PhD, wonderfully trained researcher who has published in Nature and high impact journals and, whatever, have sent people to the moon. If you have an inability to talk to people, to build relationships, to communicate, I can almost guarantee you no one will use your research. And so then you're not effective. Then you won't grow. And so that might not necessarily be super, super helpful in a super early role of getting you in, but it's a skill to hone that no matter what it is that you do, whether you're a designer, a PM, a researcher, but especially a researcher, is just building the soft skills, the communication, talking to people, listening to people, understanding their needs, building the relationships. And you can do this as an introverted person. It doesn't really matter about your personality. I think we've just kind of de-emphasized how important that portion of the skill set is. Almost
Yeah, for
anybody
sure.
can level up in a way is if they practice enough as a researcher or many other functions. I think the ones that have stood out in my career are the ones that, have solid communication and that emphasize building relationships with their partners. So I think, as much as you can get exposure to that, I think is important, and understanding that. And if you're early career and you're already in the field, don't get frustrated when people don't use your stuff. It might not be because you're a bad researcher. Maybe just reevaluate how it is that you're communicating that, across that, not just the insights, but everything earlier. Are you doing enough to build relationships and empathize with your
Yeah.
stakeholders since they're consumers of your work?
What would you say to a designer who may not have a researcher on the team? What can designers do to maybe conduct some rapid research or anything,
Yeah.
any tools or things that you can think of that could be helpful?
Yeah, honestly, and I understand that a lot of designers don't have the luxury of a researcher.
Yeah.
I think a researcher is worth their weight in gold. Of course, I'm biased. That's where you're going to see my bias shine. But I understand the practical constraints that some people don't have that. I honestly don't think, and it depends on what your space is. Sometimes some enterprise or B2B can be difficult to get people that are representative of your users. I don't think you need anything special, again, other than just a curiosity mindset. If
And
you've got
access to
access,
users, right? Like,
yeah,
yeah, that's a
but
big,
even then, there are ways around that. So it's something I've been thinking about too. Even my early days of human factors, I didn't always get a situation where I can have users come into our lab and test our stuff. I'm not joking. There were many times where I'd grab the secretary, I'd go to marketing, people who weren't very familiar, anybody, as long as there was some proxy of the people we were building for, which is important to understand who it is you're building for, and just say, hey, like, scrappy. There was literally moments where it's like I just was walking around with a 3D printed prototype and was like, hold this. How does this feel? And it's like, I don't know, it's a little awkward. My thumbs can't reach. And it's like, cool. Well, that's not working for her. And she's representative of 40% of the people that might use this in a
mm,
warehouse. So it's not going to work. That's technically research. It's not the
yeah,
most rigorous, whatever. But as a designer, again, there are so many things you could do. First, leverage the online resources to just get a baseline understanding of what research is, especially qualitative research. But all it takes is talking to people. Talk to people that might use your product, proxies of it. Again, the competitor research. If you have a competitor that exists in the space and you don't have a product yet, you can go on Reddit, find
yeah,
somebody,
yeah, yeah.
find
There's
a
always
gift
people out
card.
there.
There are people out there, or again, find a friend, a neighbor, family member, as long as they're relatively representative, and just start talking to them or observe them, right? You could say, hey, I'm building out this tool to it's like a Google Calendar type thing, let's say. And it's like, show me how set an event on Google Calendar. Like just watch them, watch what they do,
Yeah,
observe what they do. You'll figure out questions as you go. We're all human. We this is like a thing I think is built into us. We're observant just by nature. Watch what they do, ask questions. Doesn't have to be perfect. And, granted, being a good researcher is a skill set, and it does take a long time to develop and to do it well. But quite honestly, anybody could talk to anybody. Start small,
yeah,
no pressure. I think that's better than just sitting back and making a bunch of assumptions.
yeah. That's great advice. So
Yep.
one, maybe two more questions. What are you
Yeah.
most excited about for the future? Like, where do you see kind of yourself going in your own career, or anything that you're excited about, like externally?
Yeah.
as well.
So for me personally, I'm excited to continue the path of leadership. I didn't, you know, I didn't necessarily know or think I'd be on this path. I'm really enjoying it. I think I'm good at it and learning. I want to continue doing that. I really enjoy that. So just the ability to empower others and to work in this capacity, I really like. So I want to keep growing. I think there's so much I don't know, which is actually why I'm enjoying so much being in a leadership position, uh, because it's a whole new world and I love to
Learning.
learn.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, so now I've got a whole new thing that I could sharpen, for that skill set. I think externally, I'm actually excited. Like, we are so reliant on technology in every aspect of our lives. Think about it, at work, outside of work, even our physical products have interfaces, like now more than ever. And that's just accelerating. The advancements in tech are accelerating. It's absolutely a part of our lives. And it's becoming even more so intertwined, which I think means it's even more important for really good design and really good research. Humans are not going to evolve at the pace
Absolutely.
that tech does. So how do we make sure that the tech conforms to humans? Well, that's going to require, I think, people like us. So that actually is what excites
Yeah.
me. Where I'm like, I don't see us going anywhere. I see more opportunities. Even if you talk about AI, it's like at the end of the day, I mean, the goal is to build stuff for humans.
Yes.
So there's always going to be more of
Exactly.
that. More technology breeds more problems. How do we solve those problems? So I actually see that there's an abundance of problems that are yet to be solved.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, and you said it earlier, the signal out of the noise, and I think
Yep.
that's so true. I mean, it's easier than ever to build shit, and if you go to any of these like, products out there where you can prompt an entire product, there's just a
Yeah.
bunch of noise.
Yeah.
And it's going to
There
be
is.
harder to parse through what is good quality. And I think it comes back to taste. It comes back to intuition, like you said, experience, soft
Yep.
skills, all of those things that are innately human are still going to be at the forefront. So
I couldn't agree more.
awesome, man. Where can people find you? Anything online that you're active on, or
Yeah,
anything
so
like
I
that?
don't have much of a digital footprint because I'm so busy doing a lot of stuff. But I mean, I am on LinkedIn. I really am not very active, but I'm always open to people, reaching out. So you could find me on LinkedIn. If people have questions, I have a soft spot for mentorship
Nice.
and
Okay,
helping
cool.
direct people. So I'm always open to that. Obviously, sometimes I get a lot of stuff and I have to be a little bit selective, but honestly, that's probably the best way. I'm always open to people interacting with me out on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, I'll post a link to your LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
yeah, I really appreciate you doing this, man. Yeah, thank you for coming on and talking about research. I might have to do a follow up part 2. Maybe we can go into some more like
Yeah.
detailed tactical stuff. You can show us some behind the scenes stuff. But this was a
Absolutely.
great conversation.
I'm always down for that. And again, thank you so much for having me, man. This was a great
Yeah,
discussion.
awesome, man. Well, talk to you soon.
All right, dude.
All right, see you,
Take
buddy.
care.
Bye.
Later.